In the quiet town of Willow Creek, nestled between rolling hills and a winding river, lived Daniel, a man of 45 summers, whose hair had begun to gray at the temples, and whose eyes carried the weight of years spent chasing shadows. He owned a small hardware store, a modest inheritance from his father, and spent his days selling nails, screws, and tools to neighbors who nodded politely but rarely lingered. Life, to Daniel, was a steady hum, neither joyful nor sorrowful, just a rhythm he'd grown accustomed to. Yet beneath this calm exterior simmered a restlessness he couldn't name, a sense that something vital had slipped through his fingers. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of amber and crimson, Daniel sat on his porch with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. His mind wandered to his youth, days of ambition and dreams, now faded like old photographs. He thought of the time he'd spent arguing with his brother over trivial matters, words flung like arrows that could never be retrieved. He recalled the opportunities he'd let pass, jobs he didn't take, trips he didn't make, love he didn't pursue, all because he'd convinced himself there'd be another chance. A line from an old saying, reshaped in his memory, echoed faintly, 3 treasures slip away forever, time, words, and the moments we fail to seize. He hadn't heard it from any philosopher, but it felt like something an ancient sage might have whispered across centuries. That night, Daniel dreamed of a figure cloaked in robes of silk, standing by the riverbank. The figure's face was obscured, but his voice was clear, resonant with the weight of ages. "You walk ahead, yet you do not see," he said. "When others cast stones at your back, it is only because you lead the way." Daniel awoke with a start, the words lingering like mist. He'd spent years resenting the whispers of townsfolk who mocked his quiet life, never realizing that their scorn might reflect his own progress, ahead, not behind, as he'd feared. The next morning, he opened his store as usual, but his thoughts drifted to a deeper question: how many lives do we live? He remembered a saying, perhaps from Confucius, twisted by time in his mind: we are granted 2 existences, the first consumed by illusion, the second born when we awaken to the truth of having only one. Daniel had lived his first life heedlessly, neglecting his own garden while envying the fields of others. He'd wasted hours comparing himself to men with bigger stores or louder voices, never tending to the small joys within his reach, the scent of sawdust, the laughter of a child buying her first hammer, the river's song at dusk. Days turned to weeks, and Daniel began to notice patterns in his discontent. When he lingered on regrets, missed chances, harsh words, he felt a heaviness, a tether to the past. When he fretted over tomorrow, bills, aging, the store's future, anxiety gnawed at him. But in rare moments, when he simply stood in the present, watching leaves fall or listening to a customer's story, peace settled over him like a soft blanket. If you dwell in yesterday, you sink into sorrow; if you chase tomorrow, you stumble in fear; but if you rest in today, you find stillness, he mused, unknowingly echoing Laozi's wisdom about living in the now. One afternoon, a young man named Tom entered the store, his shoulders slumped, his eyes shadowed with frustration. "I'm no good at anything," he muttered, buying a wrench he didn't seem to need. Daniel paused, then said, "The one who believes he can't and the one who believes he can are both right. It's your mind that shapes your path." Tom looked up, startled, and Daniel felt a flicker of pride, not in his words, but in their source, a well of insight he hadn't known he possessed. Later, he reflected, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. He'd never taken that step for himself, too afraid of failure, too comfortable in his rut. How many mountains might he have moved, one small stone at a time? The seasons shifted, and winter draped Willow Creek in silence. Daniel found an old book in his attic, a collection of sayings attributed to ancient Chinese masters. One struck him: before seeking vengeance, prepare 2 graves, one for your enemy, and one for the part of you that dies in the pursuit. He thought of his feud with his brother, years of silence over a forgotten slight. What had it cost him? Not just a sibling, but a piece of his own heart, buried beneath pride. Forgiveness, he realized, was not weakness but a quiet strength, a way to rise above the mud others slung. As spring thawed the earth, Daniel began to change. He stopped sharpening his resentments until they dulled his spirit, understanding that even the sharpest blade rusts in bitter waters. He greeted customers with genuine warmth, not the forced smile of a salesman. He listened more, spoke less, recalling, "True words may sting, while sweet ones often deceive." When a neighbor criticized his store's modest sign, Daniel cleaned his own doorstep instead of snapping back, sensing that pointing at another's roof does nothing for the snow on your own. One evening, he sat by the river, watching its ceaseless flow. A memory surfaced, his father saying, "Water bends, yields, yet overcomes all in its path." Daniel had always been rigid, resisting life's currents, fighting to prove himself. Now, he saw the power in subtlety, in being formless and soundless, steering fate without force. He'd spent his youth chasing approval, a prisoner to others' praise, but letting go of that need freed him to become something more, perhaps not what he'd planned, but what he might yet be. Years passed, and Daniel grew old in Willow Creek, his store a quiet cornerstone of the town. He taught Tom, now a friend, to fish, not just for fish, but for patience, showing him that giving a man a meal feeds him for a day, teaching him to fend for himself saves his life. He laughed more, a sound that surprised him, for those who find humor often hide the deepest scars. And when he looked back, he saw not a life of missed chances, but one of lessons learned too late, yet not too late to share. On his final day, as the sun set over the river, Daniel sat on his porch once more. He thought of the caterpillar, envying its end, unaware it was a butterfly's beginning. He'd been that caterpillar, blind to his own wings. The ancient philosophers had been right, life is simple, but we complicate it, nature moves slowly, yet all is done. His mistakes, regrets, harsh words, lost opportunities, had been his teachers, bitter but noble. Wisdom comes by reflection, imitation, or pain, he mused, and he'd tasted all 3. Daniel closed his eyes, at peace. He'd lived one life, then another, waking too late to its brevity. Yet in that waking, he'd found richness, not in wealth, but in contentment with his lot. The noble soul masters things, the small soul is mastered by them. And as the river whispered its eternal song, he smiled, knowing he'd finally taken that single step.